He stood in his own doorway on Christmas Eve and told me to go home. Said the table was full, said there were important people inside, people who mattered, and I stood there holding a pudding dish I'd been up since 6 in the morning making, with a $100,000 check sitting right next to my lipstick in my purse. I smiled, handed him the pudding, and said Merry Christmas. What I didn't say was that his name wasn't on a single piece of paper for that house he was standing in. Mine was, the only name that mattered.
If you're watching this video, tell me where you're from or what time it is for you. I have been a morning person my entire life. 40 years of standing in front of a classroom full of 7th graders will do that to you. You learn to be vertical and functional before the sun is, because if you're not, those kids will eat you alive before first period. So when I woke up at 5:45 on Christmas Eve morning, that wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the feeling in my chest, like something had been building for a long time, and today was finally the day it arrived. I put on my robe and my slippers, the fleece ones my friend Dolores gave me 2 Christmases ago, the ones Elliot always said looked like small animals attached to my feet, and I went to the kitchen. The recipe was already out. I didn't need it, honestly. I have made my mother's bread pudding so many times that my hands know it better than my brain does. But I always put the card on the counter anyway. It's in my mother's handwriting. Seeing it there makes me feel like she's in the room. I pulled the bread out of the bag, a day-old sourdough loaf from the Whole Foods 2 blocks over, which I know she would have found ridiculous. She used whatever was left in the bread box and it always came out perfect. But I live in the city now and I do not have a bread box, so Whole Foods sourdough it is. I tore it into pieces the way she showed me, pulling rather than cutting, so you get those ragged edges that soak up the custard properly. While my hands worked, my mind went to the envelope on my nightstand, $100,000. I want you to understand what that number represents, not what it could buy, what it cost. It cost 22 years of packing my lunch instead of buying it. It cost the trip to Ireland that I kept meaning to take and never did. It cost 3 pairs of shoes I put back on the shelf and 1 winter coat I wore for 11 years, past the point where any reasonable person would have retired it. It cost the kind of quiet, grinding, daily discipline that nobody notices or applauds because it doesn't look like anything from the outside. I was a public school teacher. I was not making Wall Street money. I raised Elliot alone from the time he was 8 years old, after his father passed from a heart attack that none of us saw coming. When Raymond died, I had a grieving 3rd grader, a mortgage, and a salary that did not stretch as far as I needed it to. I made it work anyway. I always made it work. Elliot is 45 now. He has spent his adult life chasing the idea of opening his own restaurant. He has the talent. Lord, the boy can cook. He always could. He'd be in the kitchen with me on weekends from the time he was big enough to reach the counter, and he had a feel for it that I can't explain. Some people are born knowing how flavor works, and Elliot was one of them. But a restaurant takes money. Real money. And every time he got close to having enough, something would happen. A car that needed replacing, a city he wanted to try for a few years, a relationship that ended and left him starting over. He was 45 and the dream was still a dream, and I had been watching that quietly for a long time. So I saved. I sold the house where he grew up, the house on Clement Street where we had scuff marks on the door frame from measuring his height every birthday, and I moved into this apartment. I took the proceeds and I added them to what I had already been putting away for years, and I arrived at $100,000. I had been planning this moment for months. The envelope addressed in my good handwriting, the card inside, simple, just a few lines, because I have never been a woman who needed a lot of words to say something important. I had imagined his face when he opened it, that face he used to make when something genuinely surprised him, when he was young, before he learned to be composed and strategic. I wanted to see that face one more time. The pudding went into the oven at 7:15. I sat at my kitchen table with coffee and waited for it, looking out the window at the gray December sky. By 6 o'clock that evening, I would be at Elliot's house. I did not know yet how that would go. I dressed carefully. That might sound like a small thing, but I want you to understand that I am a woman who has spent most of her adult life in practical shoes and comfortable blazers, because when you are on your feet all day managing a room full of 12-year-olds, you dress for function. I stopped thinking about clothing as an expression of anything a long time ago, but today I wore my navy dress. I bought it 3 years ago for a colleague's retirement luncheon, and I have worn it 4 times since. It fits well, and it is the color that my mother always said made me look like myself, whatever that means. I wore her pearl earrings, not a necklace, just the earrings, small and simple. I got my hair set at the salon on Thursday, so it would be right. I looked in the mirror before I left and I thought, you look like someone who has something important to do. That felt true. I had the gift bag for Vivian and her parents, Vivian being Elliot's wife of 3 years, a woman I had met perhaps 9 or 10 times in total, which is a separate and unpleasant story for another day. I had picked out a nice candle for Vivian, a small box of chocolates for her mother, and a bottle of decent wine for her father. I did not know these people well enough to know their tastes, so I went with things that most people like and hoped for the best. The envelope was in my purse. I had checked it 3 times before I left the apartment. I don't know what I thought was going to happen to it between my nightstand and my front door, but I checked anyway. The taxi came at 5:15. The driver had a Christmas song on low, one of the old ones, the kind with real instruments, and he didn't try to make conversation, which I appreciated. I sat in the back and watched the city go by, 40 minutes from my neighborhood to Elliot's. He lives on the north side now, in a part of the city where the houses have 2-car garages and landscaping that requires professional maintenance. It is a world away from where we lived on Clement Street, in every sense. I had helped with the down payment on that house. That is not the interesting part. The interesting part comes later. But I am telling this in order, so I had helped with the down payment, and I had done something else as well, something that Elliot had never quite understood or paid attention to, because Elliot trusts me and has never had reason to look too closely at paperwork when I tell him things are in order. My heart was going faster than I wanted it to as we got close. I pressed my hand flat against my purse, feeling the stiffness of the envelope through the leather. $100,000. The check was made out to Elliot James Harwood. In the memo line, I had written, "For the dream." I thought that was a nice touch. The driver pulled up in front of the house at 6 o'clock exactly. I tipped him well because it was Christmas Eve and he was working, and then I gathered the pudding dish and the gift bag and walked up the front path. The house was lit up like something out of a magazine. Lights along the roofline, lights in the shrubs, a big wreath on the door with a red bow the size of a dinner plate. Through the front windows, I could see people moving around inside. More people than I had expected. The sound of voices and music came through the glass, even from the front path. I rang the bell. He answered quickly. That's the first thing I noticed. He must have been close to the door. The second thing I noticed was his face. Elliot has his father's eyes and my jaw, which is a combination that usually reads as warm and a little stubborn all at once. That evening, his face was doing something different, tight, careful, the expression of a man who has just realized something inconvenient. "Mom?" He didn't step toward me. He didn't open the door wider. He just said my name with that flat tone that meant something was coming. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart," I said. "You look handsome." He glanced behind him into the house, then stepped forward onto the porch, letting the door swing almost shut behind him. "Mom, Look, something came up." I waited. I have had 40 years of practice waiting for people to say difficult things. I know how to hold still. Vivian's parents brought some business people, associates of her father's. The dinner table it's already set. It's already full and... He stopped, looked at the pudding dish in my hands. "Is that the bread pudding?" "It is." I can take that. Vivian will love serving it." He reached for the dish and I let him take it because I was still processing what he had just said. The table was full. I had come 40 minutes across the city in my navy dress with my mother's earrings and a $100,000 check in my purse, and the table was full. Ethan, I started. Elliot. I sometimes call him the wrong name when I'm distracted. He has never liked it. Mom. His voice had shifted. Not unkind exactly. More like a man trying to manage a situation before it becomes a scene. These people are genuinely important for my career, for the restaurant plan. Vivian's father has connections that could... He stopped himself again. I meant to call you. I got wrapped up in the preparations. I'm sorry. You meant to call me, I repeated. I know how that sounds, but you understand, right? We'll celebrate. We'll do something on the 26th, just the three of us. I promise. Before I could answer, the front door swung open from inside. Vivian was in a red dress and heels, her dark hair up, looking like she had spent the afternoon getting ready, which she probably had. She is a pretty woman. I have always been willing to grant her that. "Oh, Mrs. Harwood," she said. The smile was perfect, polished, friendly, and about 1/4 of an inch deep. What a surprise! Then she turned to Elliot with an expression that was not polished at all. "Honey, my father is asking about the wine you promised for the toast. I'll be right there." She went back inside. Elliot turned to me. His hand was still holding my pudding dish. "Mom, I really am sorry, but tonight just isn't possible. Go home, I'll call you tomorrow, I swear." He started to step back inside. "Elliot!" "Merry Christmas, Mom." And the door closed. I stood on that porch for a moment that felt much longer than it was. Through the front window, I watched him carry my pudding dish to the table. Vivian took it from him and placed it down with the casual confidence of a woman arranging her own things. Around her, well-dressed people held wine glasses and laughed at something. I was about to turn and walk back down the path when I heard a voice from inside, a man's voice close enough to the window to carry. "Who was at the door, Elliot?" I heard my son answer without hesitation. "Nobody important." I walked back down the path, found a cab 2 blocks over, gave the driver my address, sat in the back the entire ride home without saying another word. Nobody important. Fine. The driver looked at me twice in the rearview mirror on the way home. I was not crying. I want to be clear about that. I was not crying in the back of that taxi on Christmas Eve. I have shed enough tears in my life that I know the difference between grief and the particular cold clarity that comes after grief has burned through and left the ground bare. I was not sad. I was thinking. The cab smelled like pine air freshener and somebody's forgotten fast food bag. Christmas songs on the radio, the same rotation they always play. I looked out the window at the lights on the buildings and the people hurrying along the sidewalks with shopping bags, and I thought about the word important. Nobody important. Elliot said that. My son. The boy I raised alone from age 8. The boy I packed lunches for and drove to soccer practice and sat up with when he had night terrors after his father died. The boy I worked 2 jobs for, teaching days, tutoring nights, 3 years running, so that he could go to the cooking school he wanted and not have to take out loans. I sat in folding chairs at every graduation and every showcase and every small, hopeful moment of his adult life, and I clapped, and I meant it every time. Nobody important. The thing about a phrase like that is it tells you something, not just about how the person who said it feels in that moment. It tells you what they actually believe. You can be polite under pressure and still say the thing that lives at the bottom of you when someone asks a casual question at a dinner party. Elliot didn't have to think about that answer. It came out like a reflex. That was the part that settled into my bones on the way home. The cab pulled up in front of my building. I paid. I climbed 3 flights of stairs because the elevator was still broken, had been for 6 weeks, which the building manager kept promising to address. I unlocked my door and walked into my apartment. I did not turn on the overhead light. There was enough coming in from the street. I set my purse down on the table, sat in the chair by the window, and I looked at the small Christmas tree in the corner. I'd put it up myself 3 weeks ago. Lights and a few ornaments, some of them from when Elliot was small. There were gifts under it, a tin of cookies for my neighbor Marguerite, a book for my friend Dolores, a little something for the woman at the salon who always does my hair. Nothing for me. I never bothered with that. I reached into my purse and took out the envelope. I held it in both hands and I looked at it for a long time. And then I put it on the table, got up, walked to my desk, turned on the lamp, and found a piece of paper and a pen. I knew exactly what I was going to write. The letter took me about 45 minutes, not because I didn't know what to say, because I wanted to say it right. I have been an English teacher my entire career, and I know very well that words do different kinds of damage depending on how they are arranged. I wanted these words to land the way they needed to land, clearly, without self-pity, without cruelty. Just the truth in plain language. I wrote 3 drafts. I threw away the first one because it was too long and too much of it was about my feelings, which were real, but not the point. I threw away the second one because I had started to sound a little righteous toward the end, the way you can get when you're writing about being wronged, and I caught it and didn't like it. The third one was right. It went something like this. Elliot, I want to keep this brief because I think you will need some time to sit with it, and a long letter would get in the way of that. For 45 years, you have been the reason I made every decision I made. I'm not telling you that to make you feel guilty. It is just a fact, and I want it on the table before I say what comes next. Tonight, I came to your home with a gift, the result of 22 years of discipline and sacrifice, a $100,000 check made out in your name for the restaurant dream you have been chasing your whole adult life. I was going to hand it to you with dinner. I was excited to give it to you. Instead, you sent me home. You told me the table was full. You took the bread pudding I made at 6 in the morning and you closed the door in my face. And when someone inside asked who was there, you said nobody important. I want you to know I heard that. Here's what I want you to understand, and I need you to read this part carefully. The house you are living in is in my name. It has always been in my name. You have a mortgage you contribute to, and I appreciate that. But the deed, the legal document that says who owns that property, is mine. I handled the original purchase, and I structured it the way I did on purpose, at the time because I was your mother and I was thinking about protecting your future. I am no longer thinking about that. Enclosed with this letter is a formal eviction notice prepared by my attorney. You have 30 days to vacate the property. I would strongly advise against wasting money on a lawyer to fight this, because the documents are in order, and there is nothing to fight. When you told me there was no room for me at your Christmas table, I decided there would no longer be room for you in my house. The money I saved for you, along with what I will receive from selling the house, is going to be used for something else now. I am going to use it for myself. I'm going to travel and live and do the things I kept putting off for decades while I was busy being your mother. Don't look for me. I'll reach out when I'm ready. Merry Christmas from the woman who was nobody important. Patricia Ann Harwood. I read it through one more time, folded it, slid it into an envelope along with the eviction notice, which I had tucked in the back of my desk drawer for entirely different reasons that I will explain in a moment. Sealed it. Wrote Elliot's name on the front. Then I sat back and looked at what I had done. I want to be honest, my hands were shaking a little. Not from fear exactly. More like the feeling of having finally moved something very heavy that you have been standing next to for a long time without quite deciding to lift it. I went to bed, set my alarm for 4 in the morning. Before dawn, I was going to drive over to that house and slip the envelope under his door before anyone woke up. And then I was going to come back and start deciding what came next. I should back up and explain the house. 12 years ago, Elliot called me from Chicago. He was living there at the time, working in a kitchen, learning from a chef he admired, and told me he was thinking about moving back to the city. He'd found a neighborhood he liked on the north side. He'd found a house he wanted. He did not have enough for a down payment. He asked if I could help. I said yes. Of course I said yes. I had the proceeds from selling the Clement Street house sitting in a savings account, and I had told myself that money was for his future. So here was his future, calling me on a Tuesday afternoon from Chicago. But I am also a woman who spent 4 decades watching other people's families fall apart, and I learned some things from that. One of the things I learned is that money given without structure almost always causes problems, even between people who love each other, especially between people who love each other. So I called my friend Rosalind. Rosalind Page and I went to college together. She became a family law attorney and practiced for 30 years before retiring, and she is one of the sharpest people I have ever known. I told her what I was thinking of doing and asked her what she thought the cleanest way to handle it was. She said, "Put the deed in your name," not to be controlling, not because she thought Elliot couldn't be trusted, but because it protected me, it protected the asset, and frankly, it protected Elliot too. If he ever went through a messy divorce or a lawsuit or some other unpredictable adult disaster, the house being in my name meant it couldn't be touched. I explained this to Elliot at the time. He nodded and signed where I told him to sign and thanked me and moved on with his life. Elliot has never been interested in paperwork. He trusts me. He always has. The deed stayed in my name. Every year or so, I thought about officially transferring it to him. Every time I thought about it, something stopped me. Not calculation, just a feeling. A quiet hesitation I could never quite name. Sitting at my desk on Christmas Eve with that letter in front of me, I thought, well, now I know what the hesitation was for. The eviction notice in my drawer was Rosalind's work. She had drawn it up for me about 6 months earlier, after a conversation we'd had over dinner where I had mentioned, offhandedly, that I was beginning to have some concerns about Elliot's wife and the direction things seemed to be heading. I wasn't specific. I didn't have specifics at that point. I just had a feeling, the kind you develop after raising a child alone and watching the world long enough. Rosalind said in that dry way she has, "Patricia, let me draw something up, just to have it." I said, "Fine, just to have it." 6 months later, here it was, just to have it, sitting in my envelope, ready to go. I have spent my whole life being prepared. It is the one habit I never broke. I set my alarm for 4 in the morning, but I was already awake at 3:48. I made coffee because there was no point pretending I would sleep. I stood at my kitchen window and drank it in the dark, watching the street below. Christmas Eve, 3-something in the morning, and the city was finally quiet. A man walked his dog. A cab went by. That was it. At 4:30, I put on my coat and my good gloves and I took the envelope downstairs. I had decided the night before that I would not mail it. I would not leave it with a neighbor. I would deliver it myself, slide it under his front door, and leave before there was any chance of being seen. It was a 40-minute drive at that hour with no traffic. I'd arranged to borrow Dolores's car the day before. I told her I needed it for an errand, which was technically true, and she handed over the keys without asking questions, because Dolores is a good friend who understands the value of not pressing. I drove across the city in the dark, Christmas lights still on in some windows, the occasional house dark and asleep, which felt more honest. I parked 2 streets over from Elliot's and walked. His house was quiet. The lights they'd strung along the roofline were still on a timer and still going, casting that cheerful glow that now struck me as a little ridiculous. I walked up the path, bent down at the front door, and slid the envelope through the mail slot. I heard it fall on the other side. I straightened up, put my hands in my pockets, and walked back to the car. That was it. No ceremony, no last look. Just a woman in a coat walking back to a borrowed car on a December morning, having done the thing she came to do. On the drive home, I turned on the radio, found a classical station, let it play. When I got back to my apartment, I made more coffee and started making a list. There was a lot to do, and I didn't want to waste any time. Here is where things got complicated for a few days, and I want to be honest about it, because there was a stretch of about 48 hours where I genuinely thought I had made a catastrophic mistake. The morning after I delivered the letter, Christmas Day, which I spent alone in my apartment eating leftover Chinese food and making lists, I started to feel the first edges of doubt, not about whether I'd done the right thing. I was clear on that. The doubt was legal. Specifically, had I structured this correctly? Was the eviction notice airtight? Had I made a tactical error by tipping my hand before I had Elliot's response? I called a legal aid hotline. I know, I had Rosalind. But it was Christmas Day. I didn't want to bother her, and I told myself I just wanted a second opinion from a neutral source. The paralegal I reached was helpful and confident, and almost entirely wrong. He told me that in my state, a person who has resided in a property for more than 7 years and has paid utilities in their name has a strong claim to occupancy rights, regardless of who holds the deed. He used words like common law tenancy and good faith occupancy and equitable interest, and I listened to all of it while my stomach went straight to the floor. Elliot had lived in that house for almost 11 years. His name was on the utility accounts. He'd made improvements to the property. By the time I hung up, I was convinced I had just handed my son a letter and an eviction notice that he could immediately take to a lawyer and have thrown out, after which he would know exactly what I had been planning, exactly what leverage I had tried to use, and I would have nothing. I spent Christmas Day in a state of quiet internal emergency. The next morning, I called Rosalind. She answered on the second ring, which told me she had been expecting to hear from me. I was wondering how long it would take you, she said. I think I made a mistake, I said. I called a hotline yesterday and they told me. Don't tell me what a hotline told you, Rosalind said. Tell me what you're worried about. I told her. Common law tenancy, occupancy rights, the utility accounts, all of it. There was a pause on her end that was not hesitation. It was Rosalind choosing her words, which she always does. Patricia, she said, who did you talk to? A paralegal at a legal aid line. Another pause. Okay, she said. First, the paralegal was applying a general principle that does not account for the specific nature of your deed structure or the written agreement you have on file. Second, I drew up that eviction notice. I have been doing this for 30 years. Do you think I would hand you a document that a first-year associate could knock down? No, I admitted. The deed is clean. The purchase documentation is clean. The agreement between you and Elliot regarding his contributions was never formalized in a way that created tenancy rights. He is a resident who has been living in a property owned by his mother by mutual and informal agreement, and that agreement can be terminated. She let that sit for a moment. You have 30 days for a reason. I counted on pushback. There will be pushback. That does not mean the eviction fails. I sat with that. You almost called him, Rosalind said, not a question. I almost called him, I confirmed. I know. A beat. Are you still almost calling him? I looked at the phone in my hand. Elliot had called 3 times in the past 24 hours. I hadn't answered any of them. No, I said. I'm not calling him. Good, said Rosalind. Now let me tell you what to expect next. That conversation cost me 2 days of sleep and a lot of unnecessary anxiety, but it also shook loose something important. I had been sitting in my apartment making lists and thinking about what came next, but after the panic and the recovery, I understood something more clearly. I could not afford to be passive about this. I needed to move, literally. I gave my apartment keys back to the building manager on December 28th. His name is Gerald, and he has been managing the building for 11 years. And in that time, I have brought him cookies at Christmas, helped him write 3 formal complaint letters to the city about the elevator, and given him 2 references for his daughter's college applications. He is a good man, and he looked at me with considerable confusion when I handed him the keys and told him I was vacating 30 days early and he could keep the balance of my deposit. Mrs. "Harwood," he said. "It's the 28th of December." "I know when it is, Gerald. You don't have anywhere to be by the 1st? I have somewhere to be before then." He looked at me for a moment, then nodded slowly, the way people nod when they have decided that something is not their business. "I'll get your paperwork started. I had arranged to put my furniture in storage, a pod that arrived on the 29th and left with most of what I owned. I kept a bag, clothes for 2 weeks, my toiletries, my laptop, my mother's pearl earrings, the folder with my important documents, and the photo of Raymond and me from our wedding that I keep on my nightstand wherever I go. I moved into a motel on the east side, the Birchwood Extended Stay, which is clean and anonymous and costs $68 a night, a price I found reasonable given the circumstances. I had checked in under Dolores's last name, which she had agreed to without asking questions. Bless her heart. Elliot called twice more that week. I did not answer. He came to the apartment building, Gerald told me later, and stood in the lobby for a while before leaving. Gerald told him I had moved out. He did not tell him where I had gone because Gerald did not know, and also because I had asked him not to. I want to be clear about something. I was not hiding because I was afraid of Elliot. I was not hiding because I thought he might do something. I was removing myself from the board, strategically, the way you do when you want someone to sit with the consequences of their choices without you standing there to absorb their reaction. He needed to understand that I was gone, not inconvenienced, gone, and I needed the space to figure out what I was building toward. On January 3rd, I reached into the bag I'd packed and went looking for my folder. Not there. I checked the bag twice. Checked the small roller suitcase I'd also brought. Checked the nightstand drawer. Checked under the bed, which felt particularly humiliating. Not there. I sat on the edge of the motel bed and went through it in my head. I had packed that folder specifically. It had the original deed, the purchase agreement from 12 years ago, Rosalind's eviction notice, and my own copies of the mortgage contribution records. I had put it on top of the pile when I was packing, in plain sight, so I wouldn't forget it. Except apparently, I had forgotten it. I called Gerald. "I think I left a folder," I said. "Brown, legal-sized, manila. It would have been in the apartment." Long pause. "Mrs. Harwood," Gerald said carefully, "the cleaning crew came in on the 30th. And they cleared out what was left. Anything that looked like it might have been forgotten went to, well, there was a bin. A bin. I'm sorry. If you had told me—" "Gerald, was there anything pulled from the bin before it was collected?" There wasn't. The cleaning crew had come through my old apartment on the 30th of December and removed everything that looked like it had been left behind. My carefully assembled folder of original legal documents had been cleaned out, along with whatever else I'd left. Some old magazines probably, a dried flower arrangement, the things you don't pack because they feel permanent until suddenly they're not. I sat very still for about 3 minutes. Then I called Rosalind. "I need copies of everything," I said when she answered. "I lost my originals." A pause. "All of them?" "All of them." The silence that followed was the sound of Rosalind deciding not to say what she was thinking. "I have everything on file," she said finally. "But Patricia, I need you to listen to me. Elliot's going to try to get copies of the county records independently, and if there's any gap in what you can produce, even just in timing—" "I know. This slows us down." "I know that too." "How long?" She thought about it. 2 weeks minimum to get certified copies from the county, longer if they have a backlog. That 2 weeks cost me a lot of nervous energy. Elliot had hired an attorney by then. She told me this via a letter she received, and they were already starting to push back on the eviction notice. The attorney's position was that the notice hadn't been properly served, which was creative but not accurate, and that Elliot had established tenancy rights, which we had already established, was not going to hold up. But a 2-week delay when you're already in the middle of a legal proceeding is not nothing. I did not sleep well for most of January. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon in the second week of January. A number I didn't recognize, which I almost didn't pick up because by then I was screening everything. Is this Patricia Harwood? A woman's voice, careful, a little tentative. Who's asking? This is Denise Marchand. I'm Vivian's sister. We met once, about 3 years ago. Elliot's birthday party. We exchanged numbers and I know this is strange. I almost didn't call. I sat up straighter. Denise. Yes, I remember you. I did, actually. She was younger than Vivian by about 6 or 7 years, with a quieter manner and eyes that took things in without commenting on them. We'd talked for maybe 20 minutes at that party about teaching, because she had been thinking about changing careers. I've been following what's happening, she said, with the house, Vivian told me. I see. I want you to know that I'm not calling to argue with you or to try to change what you're doing. She paused. I think what Elliot did on Christmas Eve was wrong. I told Vivian that. She didn't take it especially well. I appreciate you saying that. There's something I think you should know, Denise said. Vivian's parents have been talking about helping Elliot fight this legally. Her father has people he uses for property disputes, and I think he was going to offer to pay. I kept my voice neutral. That's useful to know. But here's the thing. Another pause. Vivian isn't going to go along with it. That was not what I expected. She's not? She and Elliot have been... It's not good. It hasn't been good for a while. Vivian isn't going to go to war over a house with a marriage that's already falling apart. I think she's planning to move back to her parents in the next month or two. She's not going to tell Elliot until she does, but that's where it's heading. I thought about what that meant. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Denise was quiet for a moment. Because I've watched my sister treat people like chess pieces for most of my life, and I watched what happened at that Christmas party. Vivian told me about it. I watched Elliot go along with it. She paused again. I don't think you deserve to be fighting a legal battle funded by my father while also worrying that the marriage is solid and they're going to dig in. You should know the ground is shifting. Denise's motive was real-world simple. She was tired of watching her sister use people. She wasn't helping me because she had some grand strategy. She was calling because she thought it was the decent thing to do. I thanked her. She asked me to please not tell Vivian she had called, and I said I wouldn't, and I meant it. After I hung up, I sat for a long time. The information changed my thinking significantly. Not about the outcome. I had always intended to follow through on the eviction, but it changed my emotional preparation. I had been bracing for a united front, Elliot and Vivian and her parents all together, digging in for a long fight. What Denise was describing was something much more unstable. A marriage already cracking. A wife who wasn't going to commit to a battle for a house she was leaving anyway. Elliot was about to lose a great deal more than the house. That was not my doing. But I would be lying if I said I was entirely sorry to know it. The letter from Elliot's attorney arrived at Rosalind's office on January 17th. It was 3 pages long and used words like constructive tenancy and equitable interest and improper service of notice, which would have worried me more if Rosalind hadn't already told me to expect exactly this. She called me from her home office and read me the relevant parts in the flat tone she uses when she is not impressed. They're arguing the eviction notice was not properly served because you slipped it through the mail slot, rather than delivering it via certified mail or process server, she said. Is that valid? It would be, except that I filed a copy simultaneously with the county recorder on December 25th, which establishes the date, and Elliot signed a receipt acknowledgement when he subsequently attempted to return the notice to your apartment building and was told you had vacated. She paused. He handed it to Gerald, who signed for it, so we have his own agent acknowledging receipt. I almost laughed. Gerald kept it? Gerald is a good man, Rosalind said, which was exactly what I had always thought. The attorney's second argument was the tenancy rights claim, which Rosalind addressed in her response with what I can only describe as patient and slightly contemptuous precision. The deed was clean. The documentation was clean. The certified copies from the county had come through, faster than the 2 weeks she had predicted, as it turned out, because Rosalind knew someone at the recorder's office who owed her a favor. Their attorney is not going to get very far with this, Rosalind told me, but they're going to try because that's what attorneys do when they've been hired and paid a retainer. Expect one more letter, maybe 2, then it's going to go quiet. She was right, as she almost always is. 3 weeks later, Elliot's attorney sent a second letter. Then, as predicted, it went quiet. The 30-day deadline passed. Elliot and Vivian had to move. While the legal machinery ground through its slow, expensive process, I was not sitting still in the Birchwood extended stay, watching television. I had a list. I am a woman with a list. First, the house. Rosalind had a contact at a regional real estate firm, a woman named Sylvia, who specialized in higher-end properties and knew how to move things without making a spectacle. I met Sylvia at a coffee shop in the second week of January, before the eviction proceedings had fully resolved, and we talked. I told her I wanted to list the property once it was vacant. I did not want it sitting on the market for months. I wanted to price it correctly and sell it cleanly. She looked up the comparable sales in Elliot's neighborhood and showed me some numbers that were honestly better than I had anticipated. The north side had appreciated considerably in the 11 years since I had purchased that house. She said she could have it listed within a week of the keys being returned and potentially under contract within 30 days after that. Second, my own situation. I had been living in the Birchwood for 2 weeks by this point, and I was tired of the smell of institutional cleaning products and the sound of the highway outside my window. I moved into a furnished, short-term rental in a quieter neighborhood. 2 rooms, a real kitchen, a window that looked out at something other than a parking lot. The woman who owned it lived in the other unit and kept entirely to herself, which suited me fine. Third, I started looking at places, not locally, internationally. I have always been someone who kept a list of places I wanted to go someday. Portugal had been on that list for 15 years. The Algarve coast, Lisbon, the old cities in the interior. I had read about them in a travel magazine at the dentist's office back when Elliot was still in high school and never stopped thinking about them. There was something about the light in the photographs, the colors, the sense that time moved differently there. I had a laptop and a reliable internet connection and more quiet hours to myself than I had had in years. I used them. I also called Dolores. We had coffee in the 3rd week of January at the place near her apartment. I told her everything. Dolores listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which is one of her many excellent qualities. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Patricia, you know I love you, and I want to say this gently." "Go ahead." "You should have done this years ago." I did not disagree. I was in the short-term rental, sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop and a cup of tea that had gone cold, sometime in the last week of January when my phone rang. The number was one I didn't recognize, not unusual at that point. Rosalind called from different numbers. The real estate office had called twice. There had been various administrative calls related to the storage pod. I answered. "Mom." His voice was different. Not the voice from the porch on Christmas Eve. Not the voice of a man managing a situation. It was smaller than that. More careful. I didn't speak for a moment. "I know you probably don't want to talk to me," Elliot said. "I got a new phone. I figured you blocked the old number." I had, in fact, blocked the old number. "I'm here," I said. He let out a breath. "Okay." Silence. I waited. I am good at waiting. "Mom, I don't..." He stopped, started again. "I don't know how to do this. I've been trying to figure out what to say for a month and I can't find the right way to start." "Then just start," I said. "Badly is fine." Another pause. "What I did on Christmas Eve was wrong," He said it plainly, without flinching from it, which surprised me. I had expected more scaffolding, more qualification. I knew you were coming. I didn't call you because I kept telling myself there was still time, and then there wasn't, and then you were at the door, and He stopped. I took your pudding dish, and I closed the door on you, and I told someone inside that you were nobody important. His voice cracked a little on that last part. I held the phone and let him sit with the silence. I'm not calling to ask you to stop what you're doing, he said. I know you own the house. I always knew that on some level. I just never... He paused again. I never thought about what it meant. I took it for granted. I took you for granted. Yes, I said. You did. It came out simply, not harshly. Just the truth. I know, he said. I know I did. We stayed on the line for another few minutes. He didn't ask me to forgive him, at least not in those words. He didn't ask me to stop the eviction or reverse anything I had set in motion. He just talked. He told me that things with Vivian were not good. He didn't say more than that. And that he had been doing a lot of thinking since Christmas about what he actually wanted and who he actually was. I listened. I didn't give him much back. Not because I was being cruel, because I wasn't ready yet, and I knew it, and I have learned to trust that knowledge. Before he hung up, he said, "Are you okay? Are you somewhere safe?" "I'm fine, Elliot," I said. "I'm better than I've been in a long time." That was the truth. The 30-day deadline was February 4th. They moved out on February 2nd. I know this because Sylvia, the real estate agent, had arranged for a property check that day and texted me afterward. Keys returned, property intact, ready to list. I sat with that text for a while. I thought about what it would have looked like from the outside. 2 adults packing up a house on a cold February day, loading things into vehicles or a rented truck, moving the accumulated objects of 3 years of marriage into a 2-bedroom rental across town. I thought about the conversations they must have had, the silences, the logistics of dismantling a shared life. I felt sorry about the logistics of it. I am not a woman who takes pleasure in watching people suffer consequences. I felt sorry, and I also felt clear. Denise had been right about Vivian. Within 2 weeks of the move, Vivian was back at her parents' home on the other side of the city. I found this out not from any source I had cultivated, but simply because Elliot mentioned it when he called again in mid-February. He mentioned it carefully, the way you mention something you're still too close to in order to see clearly. Vivian moved back to her parents, he said. I think the marriage is... He paused. I think it's done. I'm sorry, Elliot, I said. Don't be, he said. And then he was quiet for a moment before adding, I think she married the idea of what my life was going to look like, and when the picture changed, she wasn't interested in the actual version. That was the most self-aware thing my son had said in years, possibly ever. Vivian's parents, once they understood the eviction was resolved and the house was going on the market, withdrew their offer to help fund Elliot's legal fight. This surprised me until I thought about it. They were practical people. A lost legal battle plus a dissolving marriage meant there was nothing left to protect. They cut their losses and brought their daughter home. Elliot was in the rental apartment alone by the 3rd week of February. He called me every few days. I started answering more consistently. Sylvia listed the house on February 8th. It went under contract on February 22nd, 14 days on the market. She texted me the offer number and I sat down in my kitchen with a cup of coffee and looked at it. After fees, after the remaining mortgage balance was cleared, after taxes, I was going to walk away with more than double what I had paid for it 12 years ago. I read the number several times. Then I called Rosalind and read it to her. Well, she said, Northside appreciated. It did. What are you going to do with it? I know exactly what I'm going to do with it, I said. The closing was in late March. I signed everything remotely through a notary that Sylvia arranged, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of tea, the same table where I had been looking at pictures of Portuguese houses on my laptop for the past 6 weeks. There was one I kept coming back to. A small stone house about 30 minutes south of Lisbon, outside a town called Setúbal. 2 bedrooms, an old olive garden in the back, a kitchen with a window that faced west, which meant you got the afternoon light. The listing agent had posted a photograph taken from the kitchen, looking out that window at the trees, and in the distance, you could see a thin blue strip that was the sea. I looked at that photograph every day for 3 weeks. Then I made an offer. I was in the middle of navigating international property purchase paperwork, which is its own particular adventure and requires patience I did not know I had, when the house on the north side closed and the funds transferred into my account. I had money I had saved for my son for 22 years. I had the proceeds from a house I had bought for his future. I was 67 years old and I had more financial freedom than I had ever had in my life. I went to the airline website and bought a plane ticket to Lisbon. I landed in Lisbon on a morning in early April, when the sky was the particular pale blue that you only get in early spring, when winter has just let go and the air still has a bite to it, but the sun is warm. The taxi from the airport went through the city and I watched it go by. The old buildings, the yellow streetcars, the river wide and glittering on one side. I had been to Europe twice before, briefly, with groups. Never alone, never for this long. The notary had handled the final property transfer remotely, and the keys were waiting with a neighbor of the previous owner, a woman named Fernanda who spoke very little English, and I spoke no Portuguese, and we communicated in the universal language of pointing and nodding and exchanging keys, and it was fine. I opened the front door of my house. It smelled like old stone and someone's past, and the faint green smell of the olive trees coming through the back window that someone had left ajar. The floors were tile, old, slightly uneven, in a color between cream and gray that I cannot describe accurately, but that felt right immediately, the way a color sometimes does. The kitchen was small and had exactly the window I had been staring at in photographs for weeks. I stood in front of it and looked out at the olive trees and the strip of blue sea beyond. I stood there for a long time. Then I put my bag down and went to find where the coffee things were. I sent Elliot a photograph, the view from the kitchen window. No message, just the photo. He wrote back within an hour. The message said, "That's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Tell me where you are." I wrote back, "Portugal, near Lisbon. It's mine." He responded, "Mom, I don't have words." I wrote, "You don't need any. I'll call you when I'm settled." The weeks that followed were the quietest of my life. Not empty, full. I learned to find the market. I learned the names of things in Portuguese, badly, one at a time. I walked every morning on a trail that went through the olive grove and came out near the water. I took a cooking class in Setúbal with other foreigners, mostly British retirees, and I was the oldest one there and easily the best cook, which I noted with some private satisfaction. I read books in the afternoons. I sat on my small back terrace in the evenings with a glass of wine and watched the light change on the trees. I called Dolores on Sundays. I emailed Rosalind. I thought about Raymond sometimes, my husband, and about what he would have made of all this. A woman who had spent decades holding everything together, finally sitting in a garden in Portugal, letting herself just exist. I thought he would have approved. I thought he would have said, "It's about time, Patricia Ann." Elliot and I talked every week or so. The conversations were different from the ones before, more honest, more careful with each other. He told me about the restaurant. He had been leaning on Vivienne's father's connections to make it work, and without them, the financing had fallen apart, and he had sold his stake back to his partners in February. He said it with more equanimity than I expected. I asked him if he was devastated. He said, "Honestly, Mom, it was a relief." He said he had opened the restaurant to look successful to people whose approval he had been chasing for 3 years. He said he was not sure the dream had ever really been his, or whether he had borrowed it from the life Vivian wanted him to have. He had gone back to teaching cooking, a small class, community center on the east side, people who actually loved food and wanted to learn. He said the class was full and he was thinking of adding a second one. I listened to him talk about it and I felt something loosen in my chest. That was my son, the real version, the one who had been in there all along under the performance. I was in Norway when he called. I want to tell you how that happened, because it was not planned. I had been in Portugal for 2 months, happy there, building my small daily life, when my neighbor Fernanda showed me a photograph on her phone one evening. Northern Lights. She had cousins in Tromsø. She showed me the image with the particular pride of someone whose family lives somewhere beautiful, and I looked at that photograph the same way I had once looked at the photographs of Portugal, with a feeling of recognition, as if something I had always intended to see was showing itself to me. I booked a trip for late May. It was not late May yet, but a package deal with a small tour group had an opening for the end of April, and the guide had good reviews and the price was reasonable. I called Dolores and she said, "Patricia, just go," and so I went. I was standing outside my hotel in Tromsø on a night so cold that my breath came out in clouds, wrapped in a borrowed parka that was 3 sizes too large, looking up at the sky. The northern lights were doing what they do. Not a dramatic sweep the way they look in photographs, but a slow, rippling suggestion of green and silver, like something breathing. 3 other people from the tour group were standing nearby, also looking up, also quiet. My phone buzzed. Elliot. I almost didn't answer because the lights were right there. Then I answered because he is my son. "Where are you?" he said. The connection was slightly rough. "Norway," I said. A pause. "Norway?" "Norway. Mom." Another pause. "Have you been traveling this whole time?" "Yes," I said. "That was the plan." He went quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different. Softer, more careful. "I owe you an apology that I have been trying to figure out how to give you for 4 months, he said. "And I keep not being able to find the right way, so I'm just going to say it badly the way you told me to." "Okay. You came to my house on Christmas Eve with everything. The pudding you made at 6 in the morning, the gift bags, yourself dressed up, excited, and I sent you away and I told someone you were nobody important." He paused. "I have thought about those 3 words every day since I read your letter. Every day. And I don't have anything that excuses them. I just have the fact that they were wrong and I knew it, and I said them anyway, and I think that's the most shameful thing about it." I was quiet. Above me the lights shifted, that slow green motion. "It was painful, Elliot," I said. "More than anything I had experienced in a long time." "I know. But I'm not telling you that so you'll feel worse. I'm telling you because you asked me to be honest, and I am trying to do that." "I know," he said again. "I deserve worse than you're giving me." "Maybe," I said. "But this isn't about what you deserve. It's about who I want to be." We talked for almost an hour. He told me about the cooking classes, about how the second session had filled up immediately, about a student he had who was 73 years old and had never boiled an egg before and had recently made a perfect risotto. He talked about it the way he used to talk about food when he was a teenager, with joy, without calculation, without any awareness of how it was landing. I told him about Portugal, about the olive trees and the kitchen window and the morning walks, about Fernanda and the language I was slowly, badly learning, about Norway and the cold and the parka and the lights. "Are you happy?" he asked, simply, like he really wanted to know. I looked up at the sky. "Yes," I said, "I really am." "Good," he said, and the word came out plain and sincere, without any edge of self-pity. "About the house," he said after a moment, "and the money." "Elliot," No, let me say it. You had saved that money for me for 22 years. The house, the savings, all of it was for me. And I had it and I wasted it in the worst possible way. And you used what was yours to build something for yourself. I think that's... He stopped. I think that's right. I think that's what should have happened. I blinked. The cold air stung my eyes. That took courage to say, I told him. I've had 4 months to get there, he said, and a lot of long, quiet evenings. I thought about the small rental apartment on the east side where he was living now, the cooking class, the Tuesday evenings alone. There's a room in the house in Portugal, I said. When you're ready, there will be a seat at the table. The silence on the other end lasted long enough that I thought the connection had dropped. Then, I'd love that, Mom. More than I can say. Not because you're my son, I said. Though you are, and that matters. But because you have become someone I would invite. Someone who has learned something important. I'm still learning, he said. I know, I said. So am I. We talked a little longer. We promised to keep talking. When I hung up, the lights were still moving above me. That slow, quiet, impossible motion. One of the other tour members, a woman from Minnesota, was standing 20 feet away with her phone pointed at the sky. She glanced over. Family? She said, nodding at my phone. My son, I said. She smiled. Good conversation. I looked back up at the lights. Yes, I said. One of the best we've ever had. I stood there for another hour in that oversized parka, in the cold, watching the sky. I thought about the woman who had stood on a porch on Christmas Eve, holding a pudding dish. I thought about the envelope on the nightstand. I thought about all the years of packed lunches and postponed trips and dresses I had put back on the shelf. I thought about the kitchen window in Portugal and the olive trees and the sea. I had spent 45 years being someone's mother. I was still that. I would always be that. But I was also, finally, completely, and without apology, myself. A woman with a stone house and a garden who walked in the mornings and was learning a new language badly and watched the light change in the evenings over the trees. A woman who had stood at a closed door on Christmas Eve and chosen not to collapse into it. A woman who, it turned out, was quite important indeed. The lights continued their slow dance overhead. I didn't look away. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.